I've been doing ceramics, teaching, and making ceramic art for over 20 years. I also love the way that God is working in my life and how closely it parallels the process of art making. So when you're making pottery, it's a very process-oriented kind of a thing. So you take some clay, you cut it to the appropriate sizes, what it is you intend to make. There's always sort of an intentionality to what you're making. And then you take that clay and you begin to wedge the clay. It's sort of breaking down a memory that it's already established. Being in that bag, being in that shape or form for so long, it has to sort of be broken up and sort of spun and pressed and kneaded so that you as the artist can make what you want out of that clay. And it's so funny, it's so similar to our Christian walk, the idea of not being conformed to this world, but allowing God to transform us by His processes. You take that clay, you throw it onto the wheel, and you put pressure, you center it onto the wheel so that once it's centered, you can now, as the artist, make any shape that you want out of that clay. It's centered and willing to be formed. You're pulling the clay, you're stretching the clay. There's pressure from the inside and from the outside, but there's water to make it easier. And then final steps of using tools, edges, shapes, to create the shape that you want. And it's just so much like my experience in growth group. You know, I felt God's pressure, His hands on me. I felt the stretching. I felt the forming and the shaping. And without friends, without people that you know and truly love and are in community with, those things are difficult processes. So what I'm doing now is I'm loading the pottery into the kiln. These pots have been bisqued, and then we place them into this kiln to do what's called the final glaze firing. Of course, you can see the size of the kiln. It's quite large, so why not just put one piece in? And the answer is obvious. We want to put many pieces for an efficient firing. So we stack these pieces on these shelves as close as possible to one another for a couple reasons. The primary reason, though, is really the closer those pots are to one another, the more they influence or affect one another. It's just funny because it makes me think of our growth group and our involvement in small group fellowship. It's really the same thing. It's the proximity of being with one another that helps to transform. We have strengths, we have weaknesses. We walk through the trials of life and the joys of life together, and that proximity of being together for a period of time is what begins to change us and to make us who God wants us to be. God is using my growth group to change my life. A growth group is an opportunity to have God shape you and have an intentional purpose for your life, something useful He's trying to make out of your life in the context of other people you know and you love and trust, so that you can confide in them when you're feeling sad or when you're struggling, or you can share the joys. The end result, of course, is the beauty that comes out of all of this labor, all of this work, all of this pressure. The end result is something beautiful and something that you can use, that God can use for His purpose.